everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive. Today, we have a brand new writer here virtually, and I'm so excited to have them on. I always like to have my guests introduce themselves. So your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Hello, everybody. My name is João Dall'Stella. So I think every interview or every meeting in my life starts like, how do you pronounce your name? So I'm Brazilian, and in Portuguese is João, but I go by João because it's more fun and easy to people remember. So I say I'm João, like wow, and I'm a Brazilian writer based in Los Angeles, and I go for the pronouns him and his.
And so you actually led me to my follow-up question. I'm always curious about like, where are you from? So like, what's the short version? What's the long version?
That's funny because you're right. There's a short version and a long version for everything. I would say the long version I think is more interesting. So I'm a Brazilian writer. So I was born in Curitiba, which is a city in Brazil, a smaller city. But I only lived there for when I was a baby. So then I moved to São Paulo, where I grew up all my life. So I lived in São Paulo, which is the biggest city in Brazil, forever. Eventually, I started working commercials there. One thing led to another. I lived in Europe for a while, and then eventually now I live in LA. I will say through most of my life in Brazil. It's been like 3 years in LA though.
And so, I'm always curious about Brazilians because I feel like they're a little bit separate from the rest of like the Latinx community. I think there's, of course, the language, but also I feel like it's lesser known, especially in the United States.
Yes.
So like, what is like your Brazil? Like, what can you tell us about it? What if someone asks you like, what's Brazil like?
I think Brazil is a lot of fun. I think we are very flexible because that's what you said is very, I think, prevalent in our culture, that we are kind of a mix of everything. Like since the beginning, like since the 1500s, we came. It's the Portuguese people, and then the African people, and like it's always been this mixed place, but at the same time not the same as the rest of Latin America because of the different colonization of the Portuguese. And I feel like we are just like very flexible. We are, we tend to be very happy and that's what you get from Brazil is carnival and like out party. I think it's the best place to party in the world for sure. Like I think any place doesn't really compare. And we are just like very resourceful, and I think those qualities are very similar to the Latin community here in the United States, because it's the same thing. They have to adapt to like this new, it's a different language when you come like from another place. Of course, I mean, people say very naughty things about Brazilian, so if you say like we are good lovers, I'll say yeah, for sure. So I think that's one of the tales. And in terms of difference from the Latin community and Brazilian community, I would say there's not that much different besides the language itself. Because if you go like, for example, to Mexico City and São Paulo, they are so similar, even the architecture. It's just a question of, I think Latin culture is much more prevalent sense in the world in general than Brazilian/Portuguese. So that's why you don't hear much about us, maybe. But I mean, we are like almost 200 million people. So people are hearing us more and more, I would say.
How would you describe your household, the city you grew up?
Well, I grew up in São Paulo, which is the biggest city in Latin America. It's very cosmopolitan, I know some people like have like, oh, do you live in a forest? I heard those questions sometimes, like, how is it in this? It's very tropical, but it's not. It's literally like hundreds of thousands of buildings everywhere. So I live in a place that I would say, there's a lot of things going on. Always is the center of, let's say, like Latin culture, like Brazilian culture in terms of like media and culture and nightlife. But at the same time, it's a city where you get like, there's a lot of social differences between classes and people. So you would get a mansion next to, what we call a favela, and next to a giant building. And that's, I think, one of the very specific aspects of Brazil is the social inequality, and São Paulo is a very city that prevails a lot. And I mostly live not in the center of the city, but in a region that's called Morumbi, which is just more like a residential type of area with more like houses, even though I lived all my life in apartments. I grew up, like contrary to that a lot of people believe, I think we had like a very closed life, like indoor type of life, what you expect from Brazil, because, parents were always worried about violence. Uh, we always had to like, go to school, straight to school, to house, those kind of things that you don't think that affect you, but actually it makes me like, I still live in apartments. I find it weird to live in houses, even like here in America or everything. I think like, oh my God, that's so much work. I have to take care of like a lot of stuff. So I think that's one of the things in terms of region that grew up. And you start going out very early in São Paulo. So I think that's good. You start discover nightlife, discover a lot of people, very different types of people because the city is so big.
Who are your parents? What do they do for a living? Like, what do you know about them and their family?
My father was an engineer and my mother was just like a housewife. She worked as a psychologist before she had kids, but she always been like a more of a housewife type. And I was the first son, but I have a half sister and I have a younger brother. I grew up as I would say, a very shy child. I still don't know how to ride a bike. My life was like video games and movies and everything else. And those are I think, how to define me. And my household, I think we had like a stable life despite everything. I was too young to understand like more complicated things, socioeconomic things. But I just lived all my life in the same kind of house, same apartment, and we went to school. And I would say there was not much crazy things, like anything that was like too different.
So I am always curious about people during like their like here in America we call it high school. So like 14 to 18. I always frame it in like who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how did people see you during this time?
I think I lucked out when I started high school. Because before high school, I was very alone. I had no friends. I was always kind of the classic weird kid, I was in the closet, didn't know what gay was, you just figure out. There was no social media or like, it was still like in the beginning of those things. There was no grinder at school. Uh, and, you just like very sad, I would say. I would say I was like, that was the saddest moments of my life between 11 and 14, 11, 15, because you just see everybody growing up and having these experiences and kind of like becoming themselves and having their first kids or something else or even more. But you're kind of always figure out, oh, why this doesn't attract me? Why doesn't I like that? Why don't I have many friends and everything else? And also you want to, who is popular, but why nobody likes me? So it was a horrible time, I would say. I hate like the middle school, worst thing ever. I think it's the worst time for everybody. And then high school changed my perspective because luckily we were in the same school. In this school we had like this orientator person, like the director or something, and she put all, would say, the weird kids or the weirders in the same class, in the same. So eventually, because of that, we started like this big group of friends. So we are 10 of us, and we really found ourselves there. And we started going out together. We started, a lot of us were also gay or members of the LGBTQ community. I mean, before we knew we were a member, but the teachers knew, of course. It was great because it really bounded us in a way that we became stronger. Finally, we had someone to fight for us, somebody to sneak out with us, somebody to rely on each other. And I think that was one of the most important transitions of my life because it made me much more confident in like from who I am today. You were still struggling back then and haven't gone out, and stuff was a little bit more complicated, but it really bounded us in a way that we were still friends. And I think that's eventually I went to college and you start opening more and more and more, and you're starting discovering yourself as an artist, and then everything flourishes.
So what did you do after high school? Like you mentioned you went to college. So like what did you study? Like what was that experience?
So I was a very good student in high school. So I went to college for business school. It was just like for me at the time, even though I had a passion for cinema already. By the way, this is something interesting. In high school and before high school, I used to have a YouTube channel in the beginning of YouTube. So like 2006, 2007, like there was no, it was not like nowadays. And my YouTube channel I used to make films and video clips using The Sims, the game. And this is something that I had like kind of like a fun. I think I had like 20,000 or something like that. But it was a huge thing for back then. And I didn't realize it because I was like, this is just for fun. And so that was, I think, my first flirting with filmmaking, screenwriting, because I would just like listen to my favorite like Madonna or Lady Gaga songs and make a video for it and like using The Sims, because of course I have no actors or any other resource. But I learned how to edit on that. I learned how to do Photoshop. I learned to do so many things that are so used nowadays. So that's a little break to show how I get to that. So that was happening in between high school. Eventually, I went to business school, and because I think everybody that has a family who is more conservative, especially in terms of profession, they don't believe themselves at first. Like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. Like, it's not on the list. You are either a doctor or a lawyer or something else. Like, it's not on the list of like real professions back then when you're like 16, 17. So I went to business school because like, okay, this is very general. I'll learn something from it. And it's a good school. And eventually, like, that's the thing. In business school, I started working in the marketing department doing videos for the school. So that was my passion, like right away, that I always was trying to figure out how to sneak somewhere. I graduated and eventually started working on commercials. I worked with kids' TV shows for a while in distribution and then in commercials. So it was almost like the business school it was impossible for me to not go through this creative path, because even like going for I would say the straight path I could get, I would always end up in some kind of roller coaster and advance my career that way. And eventually with that, I became more comfortable and more confident on myself to like, oh, I actually really like that kind of stuff. I actually really want to try. I want to do a short film. I never done. Like, okay, I haven't watched much short films, but it must be just a film, but with less minutes. So I started doing those, and they were not bad. Like for the first time, I think they were not bad. So I grew up that confidence by, building my base. Like, okay, I graduated, I did some stuff, but now I want to really try to go through my passion. And then now I feel secure because I have that to fall back on.
What were your parents sort of thinking, like, of this journey you were on?
I think they didn't believe it was real up until I moved to LA. Because I got into AFI in one of my films, and that was, I think, a big change for them, because they're like, oh, like people are starting to appreciate you, and you're going there, and they supported me. But I have to say, they won't listen to the podcast, so it's fine. But I don't know if they still consider this work. I feel like that's for everybody's like that works in entertainment. They're like, but that's not work. I think they have this mentality, which is not bad, but that's just who they are. But I think now that they see stuff happening with my career, they take it more serious. Like they're like type of like, I don't know, I don't understand anything about that, but good for you. So, and I think eventually they knew I was going through like an artistic path, because I was always involved with either music or film. I also compose music as well. So I always like, that type of visual kind of artist or mentality in everything that I did. If there was something for school, I remember high school, I would do a video just because it's what I wanted.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that time when you graduate. You mentioned you're sort of doing commercial work and then going to AFI. Like, what was that gap?
When I graduated from business school, I have a lot of friends who were making their own business, such as like clothes shop, or like there was one who did donuts. There was one that did protein shakes. And then I was this video guy in the business school. I was the only one who was doing that because nobody else would like aspire in that environment. So I was like, hey, I want to do a commercial for your stuff. I'll do, just pay me the stuff, like the equipment and that stuff, but I'll do it for free. And they really like my stuff because they see my work, even though in a smaller version. So I started doing these commercials and learning by directing those as my first time directing and writing something. And so I used that opportunity to like, hey, I think I'm not bad at this. You don't say you're good right away, but you say, this doesn't suck. Like, no, I'm alone. It doesn't suck. What happened is, I remember I told my parents, like, really straight away, like, hey, I really like this. I want to pursue this more seriously. And what I did back then was, I'm Brazilian, also Italian. So I have like an Italian passport. So I moved to London for a few months, for less than a year. And I did like a short film course there, like those where you learn everything. And eventually started working the industry there, because I could just work because I was Italian. This was pre-Brexit. So that was a huge opportunity. And eventually with the stuff that I done in Brazil and the stuff that I did in London, like I would just like, hey, I want to do a short film, for people, get 2 actors. And with this stuff, I applied to AFI thinking I'm not going to get in, because I knew about AFI for a while. I would say since, maybe not since high school, but definitely since college. They'll visit on their website and see like all the filmmakers that I really like and imagine, oh, I'd love to go there, but I don't think they will ever get me. But they like the stuff that I sent, and eventually they accepted me, and I moved to LA. Never been here before. So that conversation that I had with my parents about like really sitting down and saying, hey, I want to do this right now. I was quite young that time. I would say 25, 24, and I want to take this more seriously. And I just need your help for a few months. And they were like, and because it was so seriously, they understood that that was what I needed and what I was trying to do with my life. So, but it took me a lot of confidence and time to get to that point.
Yeah, so let's talk about like first moving to the US, also moving to LA, which is different, that and AFI. So like I always tell people like the first 2 years are really hard in LA. Like you sort of that's sort of when you like get your footing, it takes at least that long to figure it out. So I'm curious about those years, like especially moving from like Brazil and like Europe too. It's like, what was there like a culture shock? Like what were your impressions of LA and the Americanness in general?
No, I've been to America before just traveling, so it was not so new for me. I just really loved my first 2 years in LA. I have to say, I went to AFI. It was super busy. We were busy, like, I think for people who know the program or for people that are thinking applying, you do like 4 to 5 shorts in a year, which is a lot. You're always working on stuff. And so I think I had like this super crash course of what LA is in 1.5, 2 years, because not only have to learn how to produce content in the city, you start going out and networking and meeting people. Even though it was the beginning, I didn't met so much people in the first year besides my peers. And you just like becomes involved in the culture of the city, which is something that really, I think that's my favorite part of LA, which is every street of the city has been filmed at some point. Everything is a landmark, a cultural landmark for some people. And there is this energy, I think, here that I haven't seen anywhere else that I've been in terms of filmmaking, and the energy of like everything is possible kind of thing. That feeling was really struck me in the beginning, because I think the other place that are in São Paulo and even London, the community that works on film is not as big. Here was the first time that I was like in a coffee shop and somebody else was a screenwriter. That never happened before. That was before it was like, oh, a screenwriter was like an alien, Here's like everybody's a screenwriter. So I think that's great, like I think then we understand each other. So I really got into that when I got to LA. And just like, even like we'll say like more trashy, like Hollywood Boulevard and those type of parts, I really think they're charming because they are such a cultural landmarks. And I think they, because so much stuff happened there, so much stuff filmed, so much people have walked in those places, and you have footage of those people walking. And I think that's quite inspiring me. yeah, so that on my third year in LA, when I could do everything, I was ready. This year, I was ready to go out and go out a party and networking. It was super exciting, but it's coronavirus, so I'm just staying at home.
And so I'm curious about like what's the culture at AFI, and what did you feel like you took away from it?
I'm really a fan of the program, I have to say. I think I took a lot of it. What I say easily is that what I would learn on my own in like 5 years or more, I learned in two. And I think that's a great value uh, because I went for the directing program, which you are always shooting. You finish a production of something, you start right away for the other. There's never so much time to think uh, what you're doing. You have to go with your instincts. You have to learn on the spot, uh, and that's why it's so good. And so you get a lot of it from the program because you make a lot of mistakes. To be honest, some of my films that I made there were good. Some were horrible. It's unwatchable. But and then you realize that the film that you make that is unwatchable didn't destroy your career. You know, it's like people remember the one that people like it, the one that was good. Nobody remembers the one unwatchable. They just said like it was bad, and then they went to get a coffee and they already forgot about a film. But when you are an artist, you think like, oh my God, if something is not good for you, you think that everything they're going to discover that you're a farce, that the other thing was better and this one is not as good. And I learned how to deal with failing in a way, but also learning how to get up because so that was my trajectory actually. If I had a very good film, I remember, and a very bad one, unwatchable, and then I had this kind of so-so, and then I had like ones in the last year that were like pretty good, which were I think my thesis film. It's subjectable, but I think they're successful in their ways, uh, and I think I couldn't have them done if I didn't fail before. And now that I'm out of it, I understand that if I fail on something, I have to continue working and keep finding to the next one. Getting the rhythm and like learning that was really helpful for me as an artist.
So like why the directing program? Like what are the differences that you saw between being a directing fellow and not a screenwriting fellow?
I think it's totally different because the directing program is really focused on doing short films and not so much on writing. I have to say you're focusing on like making those films and working with actors and performances and everything else. While the writing program, you're really, you do like 3 features first year, there's a very specific schedule of like what you're writing on. However, I'm a writing director, so I had to find a way to balance that and learn how to do stuff on my way because I cannot just be there and direct. My most of my work comes from myself. So you learn how to juggle that writer that you have in yourself while you are directing. I think that's what's really good. And you start learning how to write total different stuff while shooting another stuff or doing post and another stuff. And I think that's been really helpful and enjoyable, I would say. I wrote my first feature screenplay there. And that one I'm still working on because I really like it. But writing that first feature was really important for me because I never done before, or it was impossible.
And so I am curious for people that come to school from a different country, like what is like the visa situation? Like what was that process like?
For school, it's quite easy. You just apply for the F1 visa, and then you usually, I think, once you prove that you're here for school and stuff, you should be fine. The problem is after school, but I'm still dealing with that.
Yeah. So, you sort of mentioned like filmmaking, storytelling was something you always sort of did, something you were leaning to during business school and even in high school with like those YouTube videos, which I think are hilarious, but where do you think that came from for you? Like, can you follow like a through line where it's like, that's sort of like your storytelling journey where you knew this was something you were passionate about?
I think it came naturally, I have to say. And I think I just enjoy doing it. Nowadays, planning stuff and figuring out stuff and having those ideas and trying to develop something is what makes me kind of alive. So it just was a process of me accepting that. And to be honest, moving to LA was really helpful because then I saw, oh, this is a real career for a lot of people. It's not just me in Brazil. Okay, here's an industry. There's a lot of people who work on this every day. So that was, I think, another aspect of LA that really helped me. And I think the true line through all this is that I needed to express myself in some kind of way. Otherwise, I'm not happy. If I'm not putting something out there to make people laugh or entertain or listen or anything else, I'm not happy. I'm the most happiest moments in my life is when I forgot what time is it and it's 3 a.m. and I'm working on something that I really like.
And for like the sort of storytelling you do, what are some of the like themes you see that always come up? What are some of the what attracts you to stories? Like what are stuff you see that's always coming up that you're always like interested, want to write about?
Yeah, so my through line in what I write and direct, I think I'm always thinking a controversial topic and make it kind of fun and entertaining and turn it on its head. So if you expected something sad, I'll make it an adventure, a comedy. If you expect something really naughty, I'll make it a romance. And that's what I think the true line through my work, because I feel like, especially my past two films are quite diverse in terms of subject, but this kind of celebratory image that I create about my subjects and the humor that I put on those films, I think really are the true line to like not only myself as a director, but also myself as a personality. I just enjoy, seeing people not expect things and laugh or be scared and have like those visceral reactions that I think as an artist really interests me.
And yeah, and sort of when I was doing my research, I saw that you got a little bit of buzz based on this short film of yours called Stalls.
Yes.
And what really fascinated about it, it was like, I think it was just like the queer, it seems like a little bit of a theme of your films is like gay culture, queer culture, cruising, which is not something that I see a lot of films about. So like what motivated you to like make that short film, and can you sort of tell the audience about it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for the audience, Stalls is about a golden glory hole in the middle of an opera restaurant. So yeah, that's why I even forgot to mention before, because it's so part of me, like the queer culture. And I would say Stalls was just like another moment of my life that I wanted to bring to screen. And it's something that, just felt naturally. I knew the word, like I tried to write stuff that I know and I know in detail, so I can be very specific about it. And even though this is a very naughty film, it's on YouTube, it's YouTube appropriate. And it has like no nudity, nothing, but everything plays in the character's mind. So yeah, people can check it out. Just put Stalls LGBT on YouTube, my name. And it's been part of more than 50 LGBT festivals worldwide. It was in the Outfest a few months ago. And it's been really another part of another work that really shaped me as I left AFI and started in the industry.
Yeah, and why do you think that was something that like people were writing articles about and sort of like caught people's attention?
I think because there's nobody doing that. Usually, like I see, like if there's like a sex film or something like that, is like something about sex, it's always like, oh, it's bad and it's naughty, and you should not watch this. And this is the character losing himself, and he's going to a dark side. And my film is kind of the positive thing. It's really like, oh, actually, no, this is all bullshit. This is fun. You should enjoy it. And you're rooting for somebody that's doing something wrong, but that's the best thing, because you understand that he wants that so much. And I feel like that's why people understood that was something different, that a different point of view that has not been done before and has not been done in a while.
Yeah, no, I think it really like caught my attention because it was like, here's some aspect of like queer, like the queer underground that we're not supposed to talk about, but like as like queer people, most of us know about it. Like it's like most people know what a glory hole is, but like you're right, you don't see a ton of films about it. And I think maybe it's a lot of internalized shame, but I think yours was like entertaining because you were like, no, this can be fun. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to do in the shadows. It's like you definitely put a spotlight on it and like made it like musical.
Literally, there is a spotlight in the film. Yeah, I'm really proud of that film, and I think that's another instance where when I was making that, people were like, "Oh, this doesn't work. Like, why are you making this? This is too naughty. This is." I've heard that a lot in my career, but I know that no, it's not. You don't understand. Fuck you, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then when the person watches, they're like, okay, that was good. So I think like, this comes like from my childhood or like my high school years, which is like, okay, I'm in the closet. I, I cannot do this, but now that I'm confident, I'm like, fuck you, I'm doing what I want. So it takes time to do that. I think it's a progress of life to get that.
Also, another film that really like got some buzz, like a sort of like immigration short film, but with like another twist. So like, can you tell people about the film and sort of like what was the motivation to make it?
Yeah, so that's when I go for another total different subject, which is Dia de las Carpas. Dia de las Carpas, it's about a little girl who escapes deportation by becoming a mermaid. So it's a kids film. I would say a kids adventure kind of family friendly scenario. And it's again like what I was passionate about the script is that you take a topic that I always seen portrayed in such like I would say very realistic way, which is not bad inherited, but it's something that I've seen before. And I have to say, as a Latinx filmmaker, as a Brazilian, I've seen like our culture being portrayed in that way just so many times for the foreigner is like, oh, here's like the sad Brazilian guy, here's the favelas, here's the bad things that are happening in Brazil or any place in Latin America. However, they fail a lot to understand like I think our belief system of like everything one day is going to be better than the other, our happiness of our cultures or our color palette, like stuff like that I
Mm-hmm.
think it's always missed in those. So I was kind of like in a personal revenge against like I only see sad things about Latin America. I need to change that. So when me and Marina, the writer, who's very talented, we started working on that script, uh, I was just, really inspired also by the filmmaking aspects of it because I could really tap into something like E.T. And those films that you always grew up watching, but make it that for a Latinx audience with Latinx kids. And again, it's a very different subject than Stalls, but I've played those films one next to another in some sessions. And what I like is that the humor is the same to both. You know, you can see people laugh on both times and they feel nervous at both times. So I think that's quite an interesting way that you can see like two different topics, but I think my voice, the director, is still there.
Yeah, and what I liked about those two films, it's like for queer culture, for like Latinx immigrant culture, does tend to be a lot of like content that's based on trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and
Hate that. I can't do that. I'm not the guy for that. Don't hire me for that. I'm here to like make you celebrate those cultures. I'm here to like make fun of those as well, to realize that, get that energy going. That's what I like. But I believe that's my beliefs, like what I want to show to the world. And some people would say no, but I say yes. That's my, I would say, like a very specific goal that I have. It's to make those on screen in a very, I would say, entertaining, celebratory, respectful at the same time, which I think that those films manage to be because they're so specific, and also represent people not just in terms of skin colors, but also feelings. I would say.
so sort of what are you working on next? Like what are you looking forward to?
So what I'm working on next, it's something that I'm really passionate about. It's called Steam, and I cannot say much about it, but it's a horror as a horror gay franchise, and it's just as naughty and fun as Stalls. It takes place maybe in a similar world, but and it's been getting a good feedback lately. It's that my screenplay is a finalist at the New York City Horror Film Festival and also in the Diverse Voices. So just to give you a glimpse what the film starts with a death scene, but in a very naughty way. I don't even know if I can say this on the podcast, but the first death in the script is a death by fisting, and it's totally gruesome and extravagant. However, it's still very, I would say, it should feel like when you're watching Scream with Drew Barrymore. It's that same kind of feeling, and it's not just because like the subject is naughty, but there's nothing pornographic about it. So that's what I'm playing in the script. And you can also die for glory holes. Yeah, there's a bunch of way to die in that film, but it's just as fun. And I think that's something that I'm really passionate about, and I would like to direct that film as well.
Yeah, see, that's what I like about your storytelling. It's fearless. It goes there, and I think a lot of times we're afraid to go there.
Yeah. I can, if I don't go there, I'm bored.
I think I'm just trying to think of more Brazil questions, just because I feel like I don't get too many Brazilians on the podcast. I'm just curious, like, what do you feel like is still missing from like the mainstream narrative about Brazil and Brazilians and who you are as a country and people?
Well, I think there's not much things about who Brazilians are at all. Like in the United States, we kind of know about the Brazilian butt lift, which is that chirurgical technique, which is very popular. But in terms of media, I think what we are missing is to see that we are not just Brazilian butt lifts. We are like a culture that has like very specific things and a very diverse culture. Like people from the South and the North of Brazil have like total different ways of living because it's such a huge country. It's almost as big as America. And what I would like to see, I think, just in my terms, is see like kind of like the campiness and the extravagance of Brazilian culture in something that could be in, I don't know, if a TV show or something, because I think we are quite relatable in a way that we just have to juggle with a lot of stuff coming at us anytime. And so there's always an economic crisis. There is always a bad president. There's always stuff happening all the time. And I think we have a certain humor about it that's really interesting.
So I like to ask my guests, like, who are some of the writers that you're a fan of? So these could be heroes, peers, friends, people you creep on Instagram who don't know who you are. Just who are the people that you're like obsessed with?
Well, as a writer director, like for me, Gaspar Noé from Argentina, it's a very big inspiration. I think he deals with a lot of tough subjects as well. He does it in a very French way because I think he has a very specific voice. But he's still a fellow Latinx writer who has a very specific point of view. Another one that I follow that I see like has a very prominent career is John Herrera. He did Handmaid's Tale, The Purge. So he's always working with something that could be, it's just large media and everybody loves it. And he's still a Latinx writer. He's still building representation. And even when you mentioned Raymond, I always follow Raymond, who was in the podcast, I think. And it's just great to see like somebody that graduated with me working on Selena, the series. And I just like to follow like his, the trajectory and see like, hey, this is cool. It's so cool. It's like, it's possible. And I think that's what more people that, have peers that are doing successful sometimes, you have to take off your ego and realize, oh no, this is great. That means that it's possible instead of being, oh, that bitch. No, it's like, oh yeah, you have to like get in that mentality. And I think, it's okay to be like, for a few moments, but once you realize that, okay, that's another person that I like, their connection, that I know it's a nice person, that means I don't have to do any shady things to get into this business. One thing is that I really like to get to know other people. So If people hit me up on Instagram, my Instagram is at João Dall'Stella. I really like to know what other people are working on, if people have a similar taste, if people like my work, if I like other people's work, to watch it. I feel like the internet is just like such a, that sounds like an old person talking. The internet is such a powerful person. But actually, Instagram is really good. I think Instagram is really good for connecting filmmakers because I don't remember anybody's name, but I remember people's film or like people's pictures. So I prefer that. Like if it's like there's no meeting in person anymore, but like those business cards, I never remember who I got it from. But if you give me your Instagram, I'll remember you, and you appear randomly on my timeline, and I think that's really nice.
Yes, that's so true. I had an event and someone, I didn't recognize them and they gave me their piece of paper with their Instagram handle. I'm like, I know exactly who you are. But it's funny how that works out. I think especially during this like digital corona age, it's all
Yes.
we can rely on.
And TikTok now. I don't know if I want to make a TikTok. It's too much intense for me, but eventually I'll do something, I think.
Godspeed with that. I'm going to stay on Instagram, I think. So one thing I am curious, especially as like an immigrant and then with this like Latinx identity that always seems to be in dispute and conflict and people are still not very sure of like how they fit in. Like how has that been your experience to like identify as Latinx?
I think the experience has been shaped by a lot of people that I meet, I have to be honest. It's just like suddenly I discovered there is a community of like Latinx filmmakers that have the same point of view in terms of a lot of things, and that we share similar tastes, we share similar missions, and we have our particular organizations that I think are really helpful for us. And it takes one time to get to know that. I think it's not like right away you know everything about that. There's a whole Latinx group of people working in Hollywood. It takes like you have to realize where you go, what is real, what is not. And you realize that through my films is that I started seeing a lot of people in my film festivals, the same people. I started going, especially on Zooms, we see the same panelists. We have the same other people in the festivals and the other filmmakers. And without aiming, you start building those connections and a community, and then realize what you have in common in your films and in your passions, and what you don't like as well, what you think is wrong, what you think should change. And that's another thing that I think really connects us, is like we see what's wrong. There needs to be more Latinx people behind the camera, especially, I believe, because I don't think there's enough of us, besides our being such a big population that not only the United States but also like the rest of the world, and how our culture is so prevalent. And another thing is that I think we all grew up with similar references. Like I grew up with Mexican telenovelas in Brazil, and I can discuss those kind of like very niche reference with my friend that's from Mexico. And then you see like, oh, okay, this is what we call kind of the Latinx thing. It's actually making fun of La Usurpadora. It's in those specific examples that you see like, oh, this another person will never understand that. It's a very particular thing, but it's not harmful, but it's something that we are.
I always have my guests help me title the episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. So in the blank, you can put more than one word. You can mix them all around. Just whatever feels true to you, the stories you tell, this conversation. I also use it as a recruitment tool, community building, so that when someone sees the title, they can be like, oh, that person's likely me.
I think the easiest way to title me is like, I think queer Brazilian goes well. Queer Brazilian single 23. But single, I'm still single. No, but I think queer Brazilian is a good title, right? I think it sums up like the topics of my films at least a lot.
Perfect. And with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was such a fun conversation.
It's so fun. I really enjoy it. And by the way, for you guys listening, it's my first podcast ever. So I'm still learning, but Ruben has been very patient with me.
You did great. I learned so much. I hope people check out the films. I was like blushing and then being